Hey guys, I have a treat for you. This book is called The Improvement of the Mind. It's by Isaac Watts. It was written in 1811. This is not only one of my favorite books on memory and the brain, this is one of my favorite all-time books. You can download this book in the description. I have a link down there. You can get yourself a free copy of this book. There's so much valuable information in this book. The chapter that we're going to focus on today, though, is advice on how to read a book and understand it more and remember more. The first couple points that he gives in this chapter are kind of related more to just the value in reading and what's good to read and what's not. The first point that he talks about is he says books that are poorly written are not worth reading. He says books that are just for a specific time, like a specific month or date or year or era, and then the time has passed and they're no longer valid, well, that's not worth reading. He says if it's a book about how to be a doctor or a scientist or whatever, and that's not something you're wanting or training to be, it's probably not valuable to you. That all makes sense. He does say, though, that books that your friends recommend to you is probably very valuable because they have similar interests as you. The second point that he makes in this book on how to read a book is tips that I gave in my speed reading course. He says the first thing that you should do when you get a book is you should read the preface and read the table of contents. And then you should decide, am I interested in this? Is this even something I want to spend time on? And if it is, you should give it a real quick read through once. And as you read it through once, mark anything that's not known to you or confusing, but don't spend too much time on the things that are not known to you, because if you keep reading, then you might figure it out. He said if at that point you're like, this is an interesting book, I want to spend time on this. If it passes those steps, he said then you should read it again fully through and slower. He makes a great point. He said if a book is worth reading once, it's worth reading twice. The third point he gives you is he says you should read and study groups. Find people who have a similar interest in this book and you all read it together. And the value is they can point out things that they saw that you might not have said. And you can debate it. And that debate is going to increase your retention of the book. Number 4, share what you read in a book with others if you find it valuable. That way they can benefit from the knowledge without having read the book. And that's what I'm doing with you. I read this book. I thought it was awesome. And I am like, hey, read this. Here, this is what I learned. Share with others. Tell them about it, because when you tell them about it, you get to hear it again, and so you even learn it better. Point number 5. This is big. This is huge. This might be one of my favorite points. He says the goal in reading is not just to read a book and gain the knowledge. The goal in reading is to decide if the author is right or wrong and debate it. You read the book and you're like, do I think it is right? Debate it in your mind. Meditate on it. And when you debate it in your mind and you meditate on it, it's going to become stronger in your memory. And he says if you have determined the author has established his points well, I love how he says it, you can add it to your treasure of knowledge and count it as your intellectual gains. I love it how he says that. And he says if after debating it with yourself, if you find that you don't believe it's true, then you still have improved your reasoning skills, and specifically to this topic. Number 6, he said observe the author's writing style. If you thought he made his points well, if he was too brief or not brief enough, if he was redundant, if he could have been more clear, see what could have been done better and make mental notes of that. That's going to help you become a better writer, but also a better reader. Point number 7, the point he makes is he said you can take a book and if you don't think it's in the right order, you can rearrange it to make it easier to read. Never thought of it, but I don't see why not, and probably that attention to detail is going to help you. Point number 8, he said if a book doesn't have a table of contents, make one. Now I want you to remember this. This book was written in 1811. So a lot of books didn't have table of contents back then, probably, I'm guessing. Nowadays, most of them do. But you see the mindset. It's not necessary. His mindset is deconstruct this book, analyze this book, make a table of contents. He says the person who analyzes a book this way will gain more knowledge from the book than a person who reads 20 books just by glancing at it. But if you do this, you're going to gain knowledge. And even if you just read one book, that's better than glancing at 20 books. Number 9, he says reading is subservient to other goals of knowledge and reasoning. The goal is not reading, which is kind of what we talked about in the other point. But here he makes a great point. He says, if your goal is just to read a lot, that's like the person who just eats a lot, but doesn't digest their food. Yeah, they're eating a lot of food, but they're not digesting it. They're not getting the nourishment from the food. And the nourishment is the goal of eating. Knowledge is the goal of reading. Don't be a person who wants to just read a book so you can say how many books you read. On point number 10, he makes the point that the person who is content just to read through books is going to become a good talker, but not a good reasoner. He said it's like the person who goes down a path, and at every corner of the path, remember this is 200 years ago, every corner of the path he looks around and kind of sees what it's like, and then he makes the turn and he makes a safe journey. As opposed to the person who just runs through the path may not have a safe journey. So he's acknowledging that this takes more work, but he is encouraging you to enter into arguments and debates with the author. Point number 11, I think this is so big. When you read a book, he says, read it without prejudice. Don't pick up the book and say, I think this author is going to be right. I think this author is going to be wrong. Read the book with an unbiased mind and see if new information is presented that you disagree with. I have a copy of this book that I don't mind bending and turning the pages. So let me read to you from that copy. He says this, how unhappy are those men who seldom take an author into their hands, but have determined before they begin whether they will like or dislike him. They have got some notion of his name, his character, his party, his principles, or by general conversation, or perhaps some slight view of the pages, and having all their own opinions adjusted beforehand, they read all that he writes with a prepossession either for or against him. Don't have a bias before you read a book. Go in with an open mind. Point number 12, he says if you go in with an open mind, does that mean you can't have a foundation of belief whenever you read a book? He said, absolutely not. You must have a foundation of belief to reason against. He said, your foundation of belief may be science, or it may be religion, or it may be some other foundation, but having a foundation is good. We should always be open to hearing differing point of views. And when we read an author who agrees with our own settled opinions, still argue it, still debate it, still see if your settled opinion is accurate. And just because it conflicts with something that you believe is settled, don't abandon it. Reason with it. The next point that he makes, and this is kind of cool and it kind of tells you about the time that he lived in, but he said keep dictionaries always available. Keep dictionaries available, books that had geography available, keep books that had rivers and towns and cities and historical dates. So if something came up and you didn't understand it, you could look it up. Well, fast forward 200 years later and we have Google, but the principle remains the same. If you don't understand something, look it up. And finally, he says the biggest mistake you could make in reading is to furnish your libraries as a large library, but not furnish your understanding. He says the person that builds a large library and enjoys talking about the large library, they have gained maybe knowledge of the facts, but no real understanding. They know nothing more than what the table of contents or the index of that book said. So this was Isaac Watts' advice on how to read a book. And what was the overall theme here? The overall theme was debate this book, reason with it, look at it. What do you understand? This book, this chapter, I read 2 or 3 times just to get it in me. I read it once and I'm like, man, I'm going to read that again. And then I read it again. And then I took notes. Here's my journal on what I learned. And then I bought a copy here that I could write in, and I took notes inside of this book. So I dissected the book. I took notes. I wrote about it. When there was something that I didn't understand, I looked it up and I thought about it. I just got in my car and drove for a couple hours this weekend thinking about what I had read. And it really improved the way I'm going to look at books from now on and kind of dissecting them. If you want a copy of this book, there are many chapters in this book. There are chapters on reading. There are chapters on improving the memory. There are chapters on decision making. Click the link below. You can get a free copy of this book in the description. I also have a memory course called Black Belt Memory. I will put a link to that in the description if you want to get my Black Belt Memory course. If you enjoyed this review of Isaac Watts' book, give me a thumbs up. Please comment down below and tell me how you read a book and what your advice is. And please subscribe. We are doing lots and lots and lots of videos on old memory books and old books, and I think you're going to love them all.